Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way.
Today we're going to be talking about the topic of love and intimacy. Now, why is this a problem? Because men, as they grow, many times don't end up with much of a concept of what intimacy is all about. And women, as they grow up, get a very good concept of what this is all about. And when a woman marries a man, she's primarily looking to be part of his life. And a lot of men have no clue of what we're talking about here. And love is one of the most critical things we can be talking about, because if we don't have it, severe things happen in a person's life. Now, how important is this? Well, they've run all sorts of interesting experiments, and one of them, they took baby monkeys. And instead of giving them a real mother, they gave them a mother of wire. And then they gave them a mother, and they covered the wire with fur. And the monkeys that just had the wire mother did not prosper, and the ones that had the furry one, because they could have that contact and so on, prospered better than the others. And then there was an interesting experiment that took place in Korea. It was not really an experiment, but at two orphanages, one of the orphanages by the same company was prospering and the kids were doing well. And another of those orphanages by the same company, the kids were doing poor. They were having a problem thriving. And then all of a sudden, the ones that were doing poor did well, and the ones that did well were doing poor. And they finally figured out what the situation was, as they had transferred one nurse. And that one nurse was the cuddly type that would pick up the kids and love on them and tell them how great they were. What's another factor here? If we don't feel loved by our parents, how do we feel about ourselves? We feel that we're worthless, there's something wrong with us. Why aren't I lovable? The lack of love causes teenage rebellion in many cases. How many of you ever heard of the statement that rules without relationship equals rebellion? And that's really the case. If a kid doesn't feel loved, what's the next thing out of his mouth? Then I have to take care of myself. And we start a whole process here of someone being self-focused and someone not feeling loved, and later on they're going to have a very difficult time in their life. What's another situation? If a person doesn't have two parents, then many times they overreact and they become more like what's in the TV and what's on the movies about, macho men. They go to one extreme or they go to the other extreme too far because they don't have a good role model of what is going on in their life. And then there's the problem that our initial image of God comes from our parents. The only God a kid really knows is their mom and dad. So if they don't get love, what is their concept of God? Some judgmental figure up in heaven with a ball-peen hammer that's going to smash their thumb if they get out of line, instead of a loving, unconditional God who is totally on their side no matter what they do. But that comes initially from the parents, and we see it in counseling all the time. That we're struggling with somebody, they have a hard time connecting with God. Maybe they're not sure they can even trust God. One young girl who was cutting, this is what she said: "Why would I want a relationship with God? He would just be another person to disappoint." And that's the kind of things we struggle with when we don't get love in our lives. Addictions. Many times they're to kill the pain of not feeling loved, of feeling worthless, and all of those things come together. And it's all based on our relationships early in life. Reaction attachment disorder. That is a disorder that leads later on to oppositional defiant disorder and even antisocial personality disorder. And it's all based on the fact of not having that initial contact. Let me give you an idea how bad that can be. When I was taking my classes, I had an instructor, and they had adopted a young, I think it was a boy, from Bolivia. And when the boy got here to the United States, he'd been in an orphanage. The only thing he would do is scoot around the floor looking for crumbs, because that's how he had survived in that orphanage. And he had a reaction attachment disorder. And they had to take this kid and hold him, and he would scream and yell and didn't want anything to do with any connection at all for hours every day until he would be exhausted. And they had to do this for over 6 months before this kid could attach again. And there's even some suggestions that if you don't deal with that before age 11, that person's never going to be able to really attach in their life. So this is a critical area that we're talking about, and we want to deal with here in this class. In English, we have sort of a problem with the word love. And the problem is, love can mean anything. It can mean sex, it can mean how you care about people, it can mean commitment, it can mean if you love your ice cream cone or not. So we need to go to the Greek to understand this thing called intimacy. And in the Greek, we have different words. Now, what's really interesting about it is that the way the Apostle Paul uses this first word, agape, really isn't the way it used to be used in Greek. And so it has a lot more meaning, because the agape really means the kind of love that God has. But we're going to use it here, talking intimacy, more as a commitment, because it's benevolence, it's unconditional love, where you love somebody no matter what they do or who they are. You just love them the way they are. And so that is commitment. The next is phileo. And phileo is friendship. That's where Philadelphia comes from, the city of brotherly love. And that's your companionship part of the thing that we call intimacy. And then we have romance, and this is eros. This is that feeling, this is the chase, this is the excitement of having a loving relationship. And we have another word that isn't used that much, and it's phileo. That is T-H-E-L-E-O. And this is sort of that spiritual intuition. This is having the same goals, going in the same direction, doing the same thing, wanting to be together. The idea here is one cries and the other tastes salt. There's just some special connection there. And then the final word is just, the Bible just uses to know. And that means physical love. In the package that we're looking at today, intimacy is all of those things together. But let me define it sort of in a different way. Intimacy is to know and be known as you really are. It's taking down the defenses. It's able to be you in a relationship. It's able to feel loved, to feel accepted, to just be able to be you, not to have all the defenses. And we'll see that's going to be a problem in the future. Now, in the Bible, we have probably the best definition of agape love that there is. Here's another interesting thing. Every verse in the Bible, except one that talks about marriage, uses the word agape, that unconditional love. In only one case does it use phileo, which is the fondness word, the caring type of word. So I'm going to give you my translation of love from starting in 1 Corinthians 13:4. And I want you to think about this, okay? If you were in a relationship with a person like this, how would the relationship be? Love puts up with a lot, is calmly nice, is not competitive, is more concerned about others, humbly serves others, is not offensive in any way, is not demanding, is not irritating or easily exasperated, doesn't hold the past against you, loves the truth and hates evil, is always on your side trying to make you look good, always believes in you, always expects the best in every situation, never quits or abandons you no matter what happens, and is always and will always be totally committed to you. What if you were in a relationship and the person exhibited that kind of love? See, that's the kind of love that God has toward us and the kind of love that He wants us to have. Now, where do we get that love, and how are we going to get that kind of love? Can we agree that if everyone loved each other that way, that the world here would be turned into heaven? And of course, why is heaven going to be so great? Because that is how people are going to be in heaven, loving and caring for each other. How would that feel to be in a relationship like that? Wouldn't that be wonderful? 1 John 4:7. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. So where do we get love from? I'm going to suggest to you the only way to get the kind of love we're talking about here and the kind of intimacy that God wants is your relationship with God as you grow spiritually. We have a course we'll be teaching you next year that takes you through the 8 steps of spiritual growth. And guess what? Step number 7 is the phileo type of love. And step number 8 is the agape type of love. It's saying we as people have to grow a lot before we can exhibit that kind of love, the kind of love that God does. But God's working on us. So don't give up. Whosoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Then 1 John 3:16. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. And now 4:19. We love because He first loved us. Do you see? It all comes from God. Now why? What's going on here? How do I learn to love? If my parents love me and they care for me, then I learn to love, right? To the degree I feel accepted by you just the way I am and accept myself, what am I going to be able to do? Accept you the way you are. If you see a judgmental person, what do you know? Here's someone that doesn't accept themselves. Here's someone that probably sees God is up in heaven with a ball-peen hammer going to hit you on the head if you get out of line. Because we become like our God is. And that's the idea. God wants us to have that relationship with Him to the degree that we love like He loves. See, what does the Bible tell us? Again and again and again. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul, and thy neighbor as thyself. So this is a whole thing that cascades down from a loving God that can't do anything but love. Think about that. Since God is love, it's not even one of His characteristics. It's impossible for God not to have your best interest in mind. It's impossible for God to ever do evil. It's impossible for God to ever do you wrong. He's always going to act like what I just read here a little bit ago. So if that's the case, then why do we have the mess we've got? Why do we have all the pain and all the hurt in marriages and relationships? Why is everyone fighting? Why are people afraid to open up and let other people know us? Well, one of the reasons is we feel inadequate inside, don't we? And because we feel inadequate, we're sure that if I really let you know me, you would reject me. Or you wouldn't like me. So therefore, I'll put on my nice little facade, and I'll act loving. I'll be a good little Christian. I'll polish my little halo and flap my little wings and try real hard to do what's right. But that's not really going to work, is it? Because you're going to pick up that I'm just a phony. And all of us fearlings have a problem with opening up and really receiving the intimacy that God wants us to have here in life. What are some other reasons? Communication problems. Lack of problem-solving skills. We call it dead cats under the carpet. All the stuff you have that you never dealt with, and so now you're angry or you're hurt by other people. And when you're angry and hurt by other people, are you going to open up? Are you going to make yourself vulnerable to them? Absolutely not. How about our society? How does our society program us concerning love and intimacy? What do you see on TV? Yeah, it's primarily sex, it's primarily lust, those are the kind of things, and that's what you're supposed to be. If you're a girl, you're supposed to be so attractive and so skinny and so athletic and so beautiful and everything else that everyone just drools after you, right? Isn't that the way it is? And if you had all that, is that what's really going to make your marriage work? Is that what relationship is all about? No, that's only a little part of it. Do you see what I'm saying? Pornography. What is that? False intimacy. Why do we have so many people that get addicted to pornography today or to lust? Because they're so afraid to open up themselves that they have a deep need to be loved, but they don't want to be hurt. Let me ask you a question. When you look at a Playboy magazine, does a girl ever reject you? And you can tell yourself how much she loves you and how great you are and how wonderful you are, can't you? It's sort of a funny story. I had a guy that was really struggling with this, or had been, but he learned some things. And he worked in a machine shop. You know what those are sort of like sometimes. Anyway, they had a Playboy centerfold on the wall. And this guy coming in trying to sell him something was sitting there looking at the Playboy centerfold waiting to see his boss. And he just walks by and says, you can't take her home. There's about 3 messages in there. First, you can't have her Playboy centerfold, okay? But second, she isn't real. She's just a piece of paper. They shot 1,000 photos and airbrushed her. She isn't even real. And second, she isn't a real person that's going to really meet your needs. This is all false. It's false intimacy. It never meets the deep down need inside of you for acceptance and for love. And it will never work. But because it is, that's why it's addictive. Do you see that? Because when you try to do something and it doesn't work, you do more and more and more, and you have to do more and more to see it really happen in your life. So sexual addiction is simply false intimacy, trying to get these deep needs met, and what are you doing? Ignoring the other ones. The need for commitment, the need for companionship, the need for romantic love, the need for being on the same page with somebody else, and you try and meet them all through the physical. And it just can't be done. And how strong does that make the physical then? Absolutely powerful. So you have all sorts of problems that happen that way. How about the political environment? What do we say? Well, let's see. Homosexuality is just an alternate lifestyle, right? And we don't teach morals in our schools. We don't really take sin seriously. We assume that selfish love is all there is. I remember when I was dating many years ago, the girls usually had this particular poster in their house for some reason, the most popular poster at that time. And it says, I love you for what I am when I'm with you. Now, what did that just say? I love you for what I get out of you. I love you for what you treat me. I love you for what I get. That's selfish love, isn't it? And finally, unreasonable expectations. How do things go in the movies? How do things go in the soap operas? It's all sex, isn't it? And that's all they need, and that's enough. And how about the knight in shining armor that's going to rescue you and take you to the castle to live happily ever after? And you're never going to have any problems and never have any struggles and never have any fights, right? And of course, they're all superheroes and they're all perfect and they don't have any struggles and don't have any problems. So we think that's the way marriage should be. We think that's what intimacy is, instead of realizing this is something you have to work on. You don't know. You're going to have to learn from God. You're going to have to get this together and work on it and build that relationship with that other person in which you feel completely accepted and they feel completely accepted. How about sexual abuse? Verbal abuse. What does that do to us? Well, I can't trust you. I'm going to get hurt if I open up and make myself vulnerable. So am I going to open up and make myself vulnerable to you? No, I'm going to hide. And I'm not going to let you know me. And then what's going to happen in our relationship? Neither of us are going to get our intimacy needs met. And we struggle with this a whole lot. Intimacy is confused with lust. Just listen to this for a little bit. The difference between lust and real love. Love is personal. Lust is impersonal. Love is focused on a particular object. Lust is unfocused, capable of fixing on almost any object. Love tends toward faithfulness. Lust is a wanderer. Love seeks stability. Lust is short-lived and mercantile. Love is an affair of the mind and the heart. Lust is an affair of the emotions and the hormones. Love is a matter of giving. Lust is a matter of taking. Lust is increased in strength by a lack in other areas. It is not the same feeling or drive. Therefore, having real love doesn't eliminate lust in a relationship. Lust depletes your drive, makes married sex less stimulating, and relationships less needed. Lust is like drugs. It requires more and more to meet the need because it really doesn't. In lust, bad things are good because it gives you a higher emotional high because you kick off adrenaline as well as an endorphin. In lust, dirty, dangerous, forbidden, and painful is more exciting. It destroys real intimacy and the formula inside of you. Think of sexual abuse. What is it supposed to be? If somebody really cares and we get really intimate with them and then it is sexualized, this is closeness, love, concern, and caring. But what is sexual abuse like? If I care for somebody, I get used. So do you see what it does? One drives you farther and farther away from true intimacy. The other one brings you closer and closer and closer to true intimacy. And there's a battle that goes on between both of those things. What's another reason? Not knowing ourselves. How can I open up and tell you about me if I don't even know who I am? If I can't understand me. And a lot of men, I hate to say this, a lot of us men don't know who we are. We don't think we're just that buffalo that just lowers our head and charges. That's about all we can figure out. Romance addiction. A lot of women struggle with romance addiction. That is, it's in the chase, it's in the excitement. I have one girl I'm counseling right now. She's doing better, but she used to get, chase, and she has a lot of boyfriends lined up, that kind of thing. And they didn't last more than 6 months, maybe 3, because she would get bored with them. After the chase was over and she got them, she's bored with them, so she goes on to the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one. Relationship addiction. The difference is I have to be in this relationship. And of course, sexual addiction. We've already talked quite a bit about that and what goes on. But all these different things, homosexuality, pedophilia, all those things mess up this thing called intimacy. But how do we get this stuff? What is the pattern? How is intimacy developed? And I'm going to give you a model here. It's from a man by the name of Murray Davis. And this is an intimacy model. I actually use it when I'm teaching people how to date and things like that because it gives you a very good pattern of the steps that people normally go through in a relationship. The first one is he calls pickup. That's when you just run into somebody and you meet them someplace, and you start talking to them. The next is called let's get together. That means you met somebody, you think maybe this will be an interesting person to get to know, so you say, let's go out here and let's do something and let's get together. Let's do something together. Same time and place. Then tell me you love me. This is an interesting one. What this is signaling the type of relationship. Because do we have different types of relationships? Yeah, what if the person says to you, let's just be friends? What do you know? But see, it could also be a dating relationship. It can be a courting relationship. You signal what kind of a relationship you want. And that has to be worked out. Getting to know you. That's exchanging private information. Self-disclosure. Now here's an interesting little twist here. How many of you here know what a line is? It's usually when a guy wants to act like he's getting close and intimate, and he tells you a total lie. He comes up with how he's the assistant to the President of the United States and, you know, et cetera, and he's trying to impress you and make himself look a lot better than he is. Now, why do guys do that? Because they're afraid of intimacy. If they really opened up and told you secrets and stuff really about them, then they would be vulnerable and you could hurt them later on if the relationship doesn't make it, right? So if you just tell them lies, that way they didn't really know you anyway, they just saw your facade, and therefore you don't get hurt as bad if the relationship doesn't make it. See, you see, even buried in how we relate stuff, we're protecting ourselves and we're not being honest and truly intimate in what's going on. Then do me a favor. Physical and emotional needs, celebrate together. The next one is pairing. Pairing means you're not, we may call it steady dating, you're now going around pretty much with the other person exclusively. Then we have coupling. Coupling means that somebody calls and says, you want to do something Friday night? You say, well, I got to check with Nancy first. See what I'm saying? Okay. Then we finally have commitment, engagement, marriage, and then sexualization. That's the way it's supposed to be. Now, a picture that I use in the area of dating is that you have a chariot race. And your chariot has those 5 horses that we talked about before. Remember? The agape and the phileo and the thaleo and the eros and the physical love. And the object of this chariot race, we're running down the track of these 10 steps. And the object is to keep both chariots in line and keep all the horses in line, right? But what happens? How about in the world usually? The commitment horse hasn't left the gate and the physical horse has finished the race. What do you think happens to the chariot? See, a good relationship is based on keeping all of those things even so that your amount of commitment is equal to your amount of where you are physically, equal to the amount of where you are emotionally, equal to the amount of where you, how well you like the person and how much you're goal-oriented. Do you see what I'm saying of how this whole thing works? That's how healthy relationships are built. And I'll even rate people and say, okay, tell me where the horses are. Okay, we need to speed this horse up, we need to rein this one in. And if you do that, then you end up with a solid relationship of intimacy with that particular couple. See how that works. Here's another theory. It's called Harley's love bank theory. It comes from Dr. Harley. And this is the way it works. He says each of us has an emotional bank account for everybody in our lives. And when you meet somebody, there is 0 in the bank account. They're not plus, they're not minus, because you don't even know them, right? They're a stranger, right? Now these numbers are sort of facetious, do you understand? But when you reach 250 points, they're an acquaintance. Now how do you give them points? If they seem like they meet my needs, if they seem like they like me, if they seem like they're on my side, if they're like a friend, right? Then I give them positive points. If they're mean to me, if they cuss me out, if they punch me in the nose, I give them negative points, right? So I have sort of this deal for each person of how I sort of rate them automatically. And when I reach 500 points, they're a friend. When I reach 750 points, they're a best friend. When I reach 1,000 points, I'm madly in love. Of course, it goes the other way. You know, when I reach minus 250 points, it's somebody I don't like. When I reach minus 500 points, they're an enemy. When I reach minus 750 points, they're a worst enemy. When I reach 1,000 points, I had one lady say this to me, this she said, I get physically sick if I even think of my husband. Where do you think he was on these points? Not good. So what normally happens in a relationship? Well, when you're dating, you're really trying to be nice to the other person, considerate and everything else, right? And so we pile up the points, and we go through these different steps until we get to 1,000 points, we're madly in love, and we get married, right? And then what happens? Offenses happen. We start getting minuses, and we knock down from madly in love to now we're only best friends, to now we're only friends, to now we're only acquaintances, to now we're strangers, to now we're someone we don't like, so now they're our enemies, so now they're our worst enemies. And what's interesting about this whole point thing is, men and women, again, are different. If you want to make a lot of points with a woman, what do you need to do, guys? Do a lot of little things. Now, why? Remember, women only ask one question, right? What's the question that women only ask? Remember that? Do you love me? So if you pick a dandelion and bring it in and give it to her and say, I love you, you get a point, right? And if you buy her a brand new car, you get a point. Because they all showed that they're loved, right? Now, guys are the opposite of this. Girls, if you want to make a lot of points fast, just think of something he really wants that's big. And get him something he really wants, like that motorcycle or that boat or something like that, and he'll remember you for the rest of his life of how great and how wonderful you are. What's another problem? The problem is that we have different love languages. A lot of you probably have read the book, The 5 Languages of Love. Well, that applies here, doesn't it? Because what happens? There are a lot of people that go out, and what kind of love do we tend to give other people? The kind we want. And where did we learn these different kinds of love languages? Usually in our family. So, one of the standard things, ever hear anyone ever say, my dad didn't love us, he just bought us. See, that isn't true at all. It just means your dad had a love language of gifts. And you don't, clearly, or you wouldn't be saying that. So we have those 5 love languages. Gifts, service, means doing something for somebody else. Words of affirmation, which is saying nice things about you. Quality time, and touch. And so which do you think we give the most points for? For the love languages that we have. See, with my wife, I know she's quality time. So if I'll spend time with her, even if it's just going out to shopping or other things like that, or picking up some things or running around town, she'll say, oh, that was so wonderful. And I'll say, it is? Because that isn't my love language, so therefore I don't give a lot of points for that, where she gives a lot of points for that. So guess what? If you want to make a lot of points, what do you need to do? Find out what their love language is and speak their language, and you'll make a whole lot more points. But also we have to realize that men and women have different needs, don't they? So another way to make points is to say, okay, he's a man. Therefore, his needs are not the same as my needs, or she's a woman. They're not the same. So these are the things that she really needs, and if I concentrate on those, I'll get a lot more points, right? So what are the things that women need? This comes from a book called His Needs, Her Needs, also by Harley. The first thing women need is affection. The second thing they need is conversation, talking. Then honesty and openness. Then financial support. And finally, family commitment. Read them one more time. Affection, conversation, honesty and openness, financial support, and family commitment. Now I want you to compare those to the list from men. Here are the 5 top ones for men. Number 1, sexual fulfillment. Number 2, recreational companionship. Number 3, an attractive spouse. Number 4, domestic support. And finally, admiration. He needs to feel that she's proud of him. So those are the things you'll get a lot of points for. Now, one of the things that we've said before in marriage is that you need 5 times as much good in a marriage as you have bad. So what does that mean in the way of marriage counseling? Removing the love busters, as Harley calls them, removing one of those is equal to adding 5 good things in a marriage, right? See, here are his love busters. Angry outbursts, disrespectful judgments, being critical, annoying behaviors, selfish demands, and dishonesty. So he has a book out called 5 Steps to Romantic Love. What do you think he does? He simply gives you a bunch of tests to see if you have the love busters, and the first thing is to do is remove the love busters, get boundaries, set them up, delete these things so they're not messing up the relationship, and then after you do that, then you add in the positives that we talked about here before that the person really needs. Last thing we're going to talk about is physical love. If you could only ask one question about a relationship and you wanted to know about the relationship, what question would you ask? How is their love life? Why? Because that's where men and women are the most different. It's like night and day opposites. Ever hear the saying that women are crock pots and men are microwaves? They were that different, and actually we're the total opposite. Let me explain what that means, and there's a cycle here that's critical to understand. Here is the cycle. For a woman to feel sexual, she needs to feel loved. She needs the emotional support. She needs to be accepted the way she is for her then to feel sexual. For a man to feel caring and want to give love, he has to have physical sex. So do you see the problem we have now? So let's just say the guy isn't very loving and caring, so therefore the girl's not going to be very interested, so he's not going to get very much, right? And because he doesn't get very much, he isn't going to feel very loving and caring. So he is going to treat her not as nice, so she's going to feel less sexual, so he's going to get less, so he's going to feel, do you see how the cycle goes? Well, of course, what's the good news? You can turn it around. Either of them simply, if he acts more loving toward his wife is going to feel more sexual, he will get more, and when he gets more, then he will feel more loving, and so on. So this is a cycle that just winds itself up or winds itself down. See the problem that we can have here. How about in response? Sexually. A lot of people don't realize this, and a lot of women really struggle with this, but women are not nearly as orgasmic as men are. Some statistics suggest that only about 20% of women, this is an easy thing for them. Another 40% of women have to have clitoral stimulation. And the final 40% almost are never orgasmic. Now, why are we talking about that? I hate to tell you, as a counselor, you're going to have to be able to talk that way about this subject. Because what happens when you can't talk about this subject openly? You're not open about yourself, and how's that going to affect your intimacy? See, the physical love is what sort of glues the whole marriage together. See, we start out with the romance, right? And we start out with the companionship. And then maybe we add in the commitment or the phileo. But the final thing that sort of brings it together and makes it a special thing is the physical love. Let me give you my model of physical love, though, of what it should be like. It's two little kids playing in a sandbox. In their private sandbox, where no one else is allowed in. And some days they play trucks, and some days they play dolls. Sometimes they throw sand. Sometimes they do whatever. But do you see, it is that total acceptance that we don't have to make anything happen. What's the biggest thing that messes up physical love? Fear of performance. Because they're afraid, if I'm not good enough, on TV and everything else, what do you get? You're supposed to be good in bed. I mean, they all have to have orgasms exactly at the same time. It all has to go a particular way. And what do we have? All that performance junk that gets in there, and that is equal to fear. And guess what? 80% of your sexual response is in your mind. So if you are involved in a physical relationship and you are afraid of how you're going to perform, what is going to happen? You're going to perform worse. And guess what's going to happen then? You're going to get more afraid, and you're going to perform worse. And this whole thing is just going to melt down. And that's why we have to talk about this, because in marriage counseling, there's a whole field just dealing with sexual response issues and problems. And you as a counselor are going to have to be able to talk about this with a straight face, without, because that's what they're not doing. Most of the time, they're simply not communicating. They're expecting somehow magically this is all supposed to work. And by the way, if you can take away all those things, all the fears, if we can just have that total acceptance, guess what? People react and respond just fine. This is all built in. It's an autonomic nervous system and so on, so it works automatically if we don't mess it up. But how many of us mess it up? And how many of us have all these crazy ideas and thoughts and so on from the TV and the movies and everything else of how this is all supposed to go? So we put the pressure on it and we just confuse and mess the whole thing up. What are the main areas that we have? Sexual desire is 40%. Problems with sexual desire is 40% of all the counseling in this area. Then we have sexual arousal problems. And we finally have sexual release problems. But they're all, there's the whole books that you can have on this subject. We can't get into that depth in this particular course. But I just want to give you an overview to realize most of it all comes together. Do you see how all the pieces fit together? Now there's one study that's interesting, and it says, how can you tell whether a person really loves you or not? You know what they found out? By what they'll sacrifice for you. How much was Jesus willing to sacrifice for us? Here's a story that comes from history, though, that I think will make the point even a lot stronger than that. During the Crusades, there was a knight that was captured by Saladin. And he was about to be executed. And the knight appealed for his life and basically said, I have a wife and family back in England. Wouldn't you have mercy on me for their sake? And Saladin said, she'll forget you in a few weeks or months or year. But I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. If your wife will cut off her right hand and send it to me, I'll send you back home. She did. How much do you really care? How much do you really love? How much are you really focused unconditionally on that other person? See, the right reason to get married is to fulfill the other person, not to get for you. And the right reason to open up and do what we're talking about here today is for the other person, so their intimacy needs will be met. Because the Bible tells us that God will meet all our needs, right? So God's going to take care of you. But the question is, are you going to get a hold of His love and love other people unconditionally, just like He did, where He was willing to sacrifice His life for the other people in your life? Let's pray. Lord, we thank You that You demonstrated love to us unconditionally, totally, and completely. And You are love, and You will always love us and will always care for us. And we ask, Lord, that You help us to learn to love each other in the same way. In Jesus' name.
Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above Him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way. Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above Him there's no other.